The Secret of Fatima. The prophecies revealed more than 100 years ago that still shake the modern world. 3 children, an isolated field in Portugal, and a prophecy so disturbing that the Vatican kept it secret for almost a century. What happened on that day, May 13, 1917, that made the sun dance before 70,000 witnesses? They saw hell with their own eyes. They received messages that predicted with frightening accuracy the world wars, the rise and fall of communism, and an assassination attempt against the Pope that would be confirmed decades later. The third part of the secret. What did the Church hesitate to reveal for more than 80 years? 3 illiterate children who barely knew how to pray became the chosen messengers to transmit the most impactful warnings in Church history. Get ready to learn the complete and disturbing story of the apparitions that forever changed Catholic spirituality, and that contain urgent messages for our world today. Portugal, 1917. Europe torn apart by the First World War. A small village called Fatima, so insignificant that it didn't even appear on many maps of the time. On May 13th, 3 shepherd children, Lucia dos Santos, 10 years old, and her cousins Francisco Mardo, 9 years old, and Jacinta Mardo, only 7, were herding their sheep in a field known as Covidariria. The children came from extremely simple families. The Mardos and the Santos were peasants, people of deep but simple faith, who struggled daily for survival in an arid land. Lucia, the oldest, barely knew how to read. Francisco and Jacinta were completely illiterate. These children knew more about sheep and harvests than about theology or the great events shaking the world. That morning, after praying the rosary as they had promised their mothers, the 3 children saw a flash in the sky. They thought it was lightning announcing a storm. They decided to gather the sheep when a second flash, even more intense, illuminated the field. It was then that they saw, above a small home oak tree, a lady brighter than the sun, as Lucia would describe years later. The figure was of a young woman dressed in white, whose light seemed to emanate from within herself. The children were paralyzed. The apparition did not cause fear, but a deep respect and admiration. "Do not be afraid," were the lady's first words. "I will not harm you." The most surprising thing is that, from the first moment, all 3 children could see the figure, but only Lucia could hear her. Francisco saw the lady, but could not hear her words. Jacinta saw and heard, but did not speak with her. Only Lucia maintained the complete dialogue, a pattern that would be maintained in all subsequent apparitions. The lady asked them to return to that same place on the 13th of the next 5 months. She promised to reveal her identity at the end and to perform a great miracle, so that everyone would believe. Before disappearing like a cloud rising to the heavens, she opened her hands, and from them emanated an intense light that seemed to penetrate the deepest part of the children's hearts. Upon returning home, the children promised not to tell anyone what they had seen. But little Jacinta, in her innocence, could not keep the secret. She told her mother, Maria Rosa, who received the story with distrust. Within a few hours, the news had spread throughout the small village. Maria Rosa took Lucia to the local parish priest, Father Manuel Marquez Ferreira, convinced that her daughter was lying, or, worse, being a victim of some demonic illusion. The priest listened to the girl attentively, but recommended caution. "If it is true, the lady will return. If not, it will soon be forgotten," he said. The reaction of the family and community was one of skepticism and even hostility. Portugal had become a secular republic in 1910, and anti-clericalism was strong. Local authorities looked unfavorably upon any religious manifestation that could cause gatherings. Lucia's parents punished and ridiculed her. Her mother repeatedly took her to the parish priest to confess her lie. Despite the pressure, Lucia remained firm in her account, as did her cousins. The contrast was notable. 3 simple children, without any advanced religious formation, facing the disbelief of adults, including religious authorities. On June 13th, as promised, the children returned to Covidariria. This time, about 50 people accompanied them, curious to see what would happen. The lady appeared again, visible only to the 3 little ones. It was during this encounter that she revealed what would become known as the first part of the great Secret of Fatima. She showed the children a terrifying vision of hell. The children were deeply disturbed. Witnesses report that their faces turned pale and that Lucia let out a muffled cry. According to the seer's later account, they saw a sea of fire and demons and souls in human forms floating in the flames, uttering cries and groans of pain and despair. The most intriguing part: none of the three children had ever been exposed to preaching about hell or images that could inspire such a vision. The catechism they received was basic, focused mainly on fundamental prayers and sacraments. In July, when the apparition happened for the third time, about 5,000 people were already present. The news had spread beyond Fatima. Journalists began to appear, as well as the first pilgrims from distant regions. Local authorities, bothered by the growing popularity of the phenomenon, intensified the persecution. In August, the children were literally kidnapped by the administrator of the county, Artur de Oliveira Santos, a staunch Freemason and anti-clerical. He took them to his residence and threatened them with death, saying they would be cooked in boiling oil if they did not confess to the hoax. The children were separated and interrogated individually. The impressive thing is that even in the face of death threats, the three young seers, including Jacinta, who was only 7 years old, maintained their story without contradictions. They did not go to the cova on August 13th as they were detained, but the lady appeared to them on the 19th when they were released, at a place called Valinhos. Meanwhile, a curious phenomenon began to be reported by pilgrims. Even on days when there were no apparitions, many claimed to see signs in the sky. Over Cova da Iria, inexplicable lights, unusual cloud formations, and what some described as rain of petals that disappeared before touching the ground. What makes the beginning of the Fatima story so extraordinary is the unlikely choice of messengers. 3 illiterate children, without any theological knowledge, who barely understood the meaning of the prayers they recited, became the depositaries of messages that contained complex geopolitical analyses and prophecies that would extend throughout the 20th century. How could children of that age and formation articulate the sophisticated predictions that would become known as the Secrets of Fatima? On July 13, 1917, the lady revealed to the 3 children what would become known as the Great Secret of Fatima, divided into 3 parts. The first, as we already mentioned, was the terrifying vision of hell. The second and third parts contained the prophecies that would haunt the Vatican for the next 100 years. The second part of the secret was an astonishingly accurate prophecy about the end of the First World War and the beginning of a second war even worse. Lucia would later write, "If they heed my requests, Russia will be converted and they will have peace. If not, it will spread its errors throughout the world, promoting wars and persecutions against the Church." It is important to emphasize a detail that few people know. In 1917, the Russian Revolution had not yet been consolidated. The Tsarist Empire had fallen in February, but the Bolsheviks would only take power in November of that year, months after the prophecy. How could 3 peasant children in a remote Portuguese village predict the central role that Communist Russia would play in the conflicts of the 20th century? The message continued with even more precise details. The good will be martyred. The Holy Father will have much to suffer. Various nations will be annihilated. These words described with chilling accuracy the persecution of Christians in communist regimes, where millions of faithful were executed or sent to forced labor camps. But it was the third part of the secret that caused the greatest mystery. Lucia wrote it and delivered it in a sealed envelope to the Bishop of Leiria in 1944, with specific instructions that it could only be opened in 1960 or after her death, whichever came first. When the envelope reached the Vatican, Pope John XCI read it in 1959 and decided not to reveal its contents. He is said to have declared, "This is not for our time." His successors, Paul VI and John Paul I, also read the secret and maintained the same silence. The mystery only increased when John Paul II, after surviving an assassination attempt on May 13, 1981, exactly 64 years after the first apparition, attributed his survival to the intervention of Our Lady of Fatima. "One hand fired the shot, another guided the bullet," he declared. In 2000, during the Jubilee, the Vatican finally decided to reveal the third part of the secret. Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, future Pope Benedict XVI, presented the text, which described a vision of a bishop dressed in white, who would be killed by soldiers after climbing an arduous mountain, passing through a city in ruins filled with corpses. The Vatican officially interpreted this vision as a reference to the assassination attempt against John Paul II. However, many scholars and faithful questioned this interpretation. After all, the Pope was not killed, as the vision indicated, and there was no city in ruins. Theories emerged that the secret had not been fully revealed. Pope John Paul II's personal secretary, Cardinal Stanislaw Dziwisz, fueled these suspicions when he stated in 2010 that there are more details that have not been revealed. Father Nicholas Gruner, known as the Fatima priest, spent decades arguing that the Vatican had not disclosed the true third secret and that its content was much more alarming. It would prophesy a great apostasy within the Catholic Church itself, with bishops against bishops and cardinals against cardinals. Other theorists suggested that the secret would contain warnings about a flawed Vatican Council, possibly referring to Vatican II, liturgical changes that would weaken the faith, and the infiltration of enemies within the clergy. Some even claim that the apocalyptic vision would include the destruction of Rome and a global cataclysm. Antonio Socci, a Catholic journalist and writer, published a book titled The Fourth Secret of Fatima, where he argues that there is a part of the secret still not revealed, based on discrepancies in Lucia's testimony and contradictory statements from Vatican authorities. The fascinating thing is that, regardless of the controversies surrounding the third part, the first two would already be sufficiently impressive in their prophetic accuracy. The message of Fatima correctly predicted the outbreak of the Second World War, the global expansion of Soviet communism, religious persecution in communist countries, the suffering of the popes, especially with the 1981 assassination attempt, the eventual fall of communism in Russia. How can we explain that 3 peasant children, without access to complex geopolitical information, could articulate such specific predictions that were confirmed over the following decades? On July 13, 1917, the lady had promised, "In October I will tell you who I am, what I want, and I will perform a miracle that everyone shall see to believe." This promise caused an extraordinary crowd to gather at Covido area on October 13th of the same year. It is estimated that 70,000 people were present on that rainy day. Among them were not only devoted faithful, but also skeptics, scientists, journalists from major newspapers, including the anticlerical O Seculo, and even Freemasons and freethinkers who expected to witness the failure of the prophecy. Rain had been falling intensely since the previous night. The field had turned into a muddy mess. People were soaked, and many skeptics had already begun to mock the pilgrims. Avellino da Almeida, editor of the newspaper O Seculo, was present to document what he called the Great Farce of Fatima. At 12 o'clock solar time, around 1:30 p.m. in official Portuguese time, Lucia shouted for the crowd to open their umbrellas and close them, as Our Lady had arrived. At that exact moment, the rain suddenly stopped. What happened next was witnessed by tens of thousands of people simultaneously and reported in Portuguese newspapers in the following days. The same Avellino da Almeida, who had come to unmask the event, would write, "The sun moments before had broken through the gray mantle of clouds that concealed it and was shining clearly. Suddenly, there was an outcry, like thousands of voices. Many thousands of people believed they had seen the promised prodigy. Witnesses described that the sun seemed to dance, spinning on itself like a wheel of fire, casting colored beams of light in all directions, red, blue, green, and purple, coloring the people, trees, rocks, and ground. Most inexplicable of all, people could look directly at the sun without any visual discomfort. The sun then seemed to detach itself from the sky and fall toward earth, causing screams of terror in the crowd. Many fell to their knees in the mud, praying and confessing sins aloud, believing it was the end of the world. After a few minutes, the sun returned to its normal position. The phenomenon lasted approximately 10 minutes. When it ended, another surprise. People's clothes, completely soaked minutes before, were totally dry, as was the ground that had been transformed into mud by the intense rain. What makes the miracle of the sun so extraordinary is that it was 1. Massively witnessed by tens of thousands of people simultaneously. 2. Documented by the secular and anti-clerical press. 3. Seen by people up to 40 kilometers away from COVID or Iria. 4. Witnessed by skeptics, atheists, and free thinkers who had gone to the site to discredit the apparitions. Avelino de Almeida, the skeptical journalist, wrote in his account, "I saw what the crowd saw, how the believers rejoiced, how satisfied they were to have witnessed the promised miracle." Professor Garrett, from a Faculty of Sciences of Coimbra, present at the site, described, "The sun, maintaining the speed of its rotation, detached itself from the firmament and, blood-red, advanced toward the earth, threatening to crush us with its immense and fiery weight." Modern science has tried to explain the phenomenon in various ways. Mass illusion, rare atmospheric phenomenon, solar reflections on ice crystals in the atmosphere, or even a form of collective hysteria. However, no explanation can account for all the reported aspects. The dance of the sun, the projected colors, the instant drying of clothes and soil, and the fact that it was observed tens of kilometers away. English astronomer C.J. Stratton pointed out, there is no known astronomical or meteorological explanation for the phenomenon described at Fatima. If it occurred as reported by so many independent witnesses, it is an unprecedented event in the history of astronomical observation. Curiously, while the crowd observed the solar prodigy, the three visionary children saw something completely different. A series of visions. First, the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, blessing the world. Then, Our Lady of Sorrows next to Jesus, carrying the cross. Finally, Our Lady of Mount Carmel, crowned as Queen of Heaven and Earth. It was at this moment that the Lady finally revealed her identity to the children. "I am the Lady of the Rosary," and she asked that a shrine be built on that site in her honor. In the weeks following the miracle, the Portuguese press, even the secular and anti-clerical newspapers, published extensive accounts and photographs of the crowd during the event. The testimonies collected came from people of all social classes, educational levels, and religious positions, with remarkable consistency in the descriptions of the phenomenon. The miracle of the sun remains the best documented Marian event in modern history, and one of the public religious phenomena with the largest number of eyewitnesses. How can we explain that an event announced 3 months in advance by 3 illiterate children materialized in such a spectacular and inexplicable way? After the apparitions, the lives of the 3 young seers took a dramatic turn. The Lady had made specific predictions about the destiny of each of them, prophecies that were fulfilled with disturbing precision. During the apparition of June 1917, while speaking with Lucia, the Lady said, "Yes, I will soon take Francisco and Jacinta to heaven, but you will remain here for some time longer. Jesus wishes to use you to make me known and loved." Lucia asked, "Will I be left alone?" To which the Lady replied, "No, my daughter. I will never leave you. My immaculate heart will be your refuge and the way that will lead you to God." The striking thing is that despite being perfectly healthy during the apparitions, Francisco and Jacinta died very young, exactly as predicted by Our Lady. In October 1918, less than a year after the apparitions, both contracted the Spanish flu during the global pandemic. Francisco, the boy who could see the Lady but not hear her, suffered intensely for 6 months. He had told Lucia, "I like very much to see Our Lady, but I like even more to console Jesus, who is so sad." Faithful to this desire, he accepted his suffering with extraordinary serenity for a child. He died on April 4, 1919, at just 10 years of age, after receiving his first communion on his deathbed. Jacinta's case, however, was even more devastating. The 7-year-old girl, who had been profoundly affected by the vision of hell, developed purulent pleurisy after the Spanish flu. Her condition deteriorated, forming an open wound in her chest that required painful daily dressings. Transferred to a hospital in Lisbon, far from her family, Jacinta underwent an operation without anesthesia, during which 2 ribs were removed. She endured the pain in absolute silence, offering her suffering for sinners, as she had promised the Lady. Before dying, Jacinta had several private visions of Our Lady. She made additional prophecies, including about fashion. Fashions will come that will greatly offend our Lord, and about the role of the Pope, pray much for the Holy Father. He will have much to suffer. The most moving detail, Jacinta told the nurse who was caring for her, Our Lady will come for me on February 20th at night. On that exact date, February 20th, 1920, the little seer died alone in the hospital, without the presence of family members or priests, as she had also predicted. When the bodies of the two children were exhumed in 1935 and 1951, it was verified that they were incorrupt. Jacinta's face was perfectly preserved, with a serene expression, as if she were merely sleeping. Meanwhile, according to the prophecy, Lucia remained for some time longer. In fact, much longer. She entered the Dorothean convent in 1921, where she remained in relative anonymity as Sister Maria das Dores. In 1948, she transferred to the Carmel of Coimbra, where she became Sister Lucia of the Immaculate Heart. During her long religious life, Lucia received several additional visions. In 1925, in Pontevedra, Spain, she had an apparition in which Our Lady requested the devotion of the 5 first Saturdays. In 1929, in Tai, she received the vision of the Holy Trinity and the specific request for the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. The curious thing is that, despite being a cloistered nun, Lucia was visited by several popes who wanted to hear her testimony about Fatima firsthand. Paul VI met with her during his visit to the sanctuary in 1967. John Paul II had 3 private meetings with the seer in 1982, 1991, and 2000. What few people know, Lucia warned John Paul II during one of these meetings that the 1981 assassination attempt was the partial fulfillment of the 3rd part of the secret, but that the dangers continued. Lucia lived to see the canonization of her cousins, the youngest non-martyr saints in the history of the Church. Francisco and Jacinta were beatified on May 13, 2000, and canonized on May 13, 2017, exactly on the centenary of the apparitions. The last Fatima seer died on February 13, 2005, at the age of 97, a remarkable longevity considering that she lived almost a century beyond her cousins. Her beatification process was opened in 2008, with a dispensation from the usual 5-year waiting period after death. The impressive contrast between the destinies of the 3 seers, the early and sacrificial deaths of Francisco and Jacinta, and Lucia's missionary longevity, was precisely what the Lady had announced. How do we explain that such young children, facing intense physical suffering, maintained a serenity and acceptance that surprised doctors and priests? More than 100 years after the apparitions of Fatima, their message resonates with impressive relevance. What began as a local phenomenon in an obscure Portuguese village transformed into a global devotion with profound implications for the Church and the contemporary world. The core of the Fatima message, conversion, penance, and reparation, remains as urgent today as it was in 1917. The apparitions occurred at a crucial moment. The world was immersed in the First World War, the Russian Revolution was underway, and secularism was rapidly advancing across Europe. Today, we face similar challenges on a global scale. An intriguing aspect of the message is its continuous openness. Unlike other Marian apparitions, Fatima did not end with a last vision in 1917. Through Lucia, Our Lady continued to communicate, developing and applying the message to the changing circumstances of the 20th century. In 1929 in Tai, Spain, Our Lady appeared to Lucia with a specific request. The moment has come when God asks the Holy Father, in union with all the bishops of the world, to consecrate Russia to my Immaculate Heart, promising to save it by this means. What few people know is that this request generated decades of controversy over whether it was adequately fulfilled. Pius XII consecrated the world to the Immaculate Heart in 1942, but without specifically mentioning Russia. John Paul II performed consecrations in 1982 and 1984, the latter in union with the bishops of the world, but again without explicitly mentioning Russia, due to Cold War tensions. Lucia stated in 1989 that the 1984 consecration had been accepted in heaven. Coincidentally or not, the Soviet Union began to crumble shortly afterward, with the fall of the Berlin Wall that same year and the definitive collapse in 1991. Another central element of the Fatima message is the so-called triumph of the Immaculate Heart, a promise of peace that, according to the message, would come after periods of great tribulation. This concept has fueled interpretations that we are living in the end times described in the Scriptures. Cardinal Ratzinger, future Pope Benedict XVI, in his theological commentary on the Third Secret in 2000, addressed this issue. The Immaculate Heart is, according to Matthew 5 verse 8, a heart purified by faith, living in harmony with God's will. If someone approaches this heart and lives in communion with it, they are led to God. Scholars of the Fatima message point to its extraordinary scope: spiritual, moral, ecclesial, and geopolitical. Spiritually, Fatima emphasizes the power of prayer, especially the Rosary, as an instrument of personal conversion and world peace. Morally, it warns against the errors of ideologies that deny God and human dignity. Ecclesially, it points to internal challenges to the Church, including possible divisions and apostasies. Geopolitically, it relates world events to the spiritual state of humanity. An often neglected aspect of the message is the call to reparation for sins. Our Lady taught the children a specific prayer: "O Jesus, it is for your love, for the conversion of sinners, and in reparation for the sins committed against the Immaculate Heart of Mary." The Sanctuary of Fatima has become one of the most important pilgrimage centers in the Catholic world, receiving millions of faithful annually. The image of Our Lady of Fatima has traveled the world in pilgrimages that have attracted impressive crowds on all continents. What makes Fatima unique in the context of Marian apparitions is its prophetic dimension confirmed by historical events. While other apparitions approved by the Church focused mainly on messages of personal conversion, Fatima presented a detailed roadmap of the challenges that the world and the Church would face. Recent events seem to give new relevance to the message. The growing persecution of Christians in various parts of the world, the decline of faith in Europe, attacks on families and traditional values, and geopolitical conflicts that many see as harbingers of the end times. In 2017, on the centenary of the apparitions, Pope Francis canonized Francisco and Jacinta Marto and visited the sanctuary. In his homily, he stated, "We have a mother, a lady dressed in white, who came from God to remind us of the light of Him that dwells within us. From her arm, the light of God spread until it reached the ends of the earth." A surprising detail: the global COVID-19 pandemic, which emerged in 2020, exactly 100 years after Jacinta's death, led many Fatima scholars to revisit the prophecies of the Little Seer. Before dying, Jacinta had said, "There will be a disease that God will allow to atone for the sins of the world and for the conversion of sinners." This prediction, recorded in Lucia's diaries, gained new attention during the global health crisis. For today's world, the message of Fatima offers a counterpoint to materialism, religious indifference, and moral relativism. It presents a vision of the world in which human actions have spiritual consequences, where prayer can change the course of history, and where suffering, accepted with love, has redemptive power. As St. John Paul II, the Pope most associated with devotion to Fatima, said, "The message of Fatima is a call to conversion, warning humanity not to collaborate with the dragon through individual and social sin. The ultimate goal of man is heaven, his true home, where the Heavenly Father, in His merciful love, awaits everyone." The story of Fatima is not just an account of extraordinary events of the past. It is an urgent call for our time, an invitation to personal conversion, and a renewal of faith in an increasingly secularized world. Looking at the three little seers, we find profound lessons for our spiritual journey. In Francisco, we see the contemplative, the one who saw but did not hear, and whose main concern was to console Jesus. He teaches us the value of silence, adoration, and compassion for Christ's suffering. In Jacinta, the youngest, we find the fervent missionary, deeply impacted by the vision of hell and consumed by the desire to save souls. Even on her deathbed, she repeated, "If people knew what eternity is, they would do everything to change their lives." She teaches us apostolic zeal and the redemptive value of suffering offered in love. In Lucia, the long-lived messenger, we see persevering fidelity. For almost a century, she kept the message of Fatima alive, facing skepticism, misunderstanding, and even persecution. She teaches us constancy in faith and trust in the fulfillment of divine promises, even when they seem to take time. Today's world faces challenges that the Fatima seers could not imagine in their rural context of the early 20th century. We live in an era of advanced technology, instant communication, and scientific possibilities that seem unlimited. However, these material achievements have not brought the promised peace and harmony. The fragmentation of the family, spiritual emptiness, the throwaway culture denounced by Pope Francis, exacerbated individualism. All these are symptoms of a humanity that, as Our Lady warned, has moved away from God. The message of Fatima offers us a way back, not through complex formulas, but through simple practices accessible to all. Daily prayer of the Rosary, which Our Lady requested in each of the 6 apparitions. The devotion of the 5 first Saturdays, in reparation to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Personal consecration to the Immaculate Heart. The acceptance of daily sacrifices for the love of God and the salvation of souls. This is the spirituality of the little ones that Fatima proposes to us, accessible to all, regardless of theological or intellectual formation, but capable of transforming hearts, and, through them, the world. Pope Benedict XVI, in his visit to Fatima in 2010, stated, "He would be deceived who thinks that the prophetic mission of Fatima is concluded." And he added that, in the human suffering that continues to afflict humanity, the suffering of the Church is announced, which in various ways continues to be the target of attacks from the evil one. In this sense, Fatima is not just one devotion among many, but a prophetic call for our time, a light on the darkened horizon of a world in crisis. As Lucia said, "Since Our Lady has given such efficacy to the Rosary, there is no material, spiritual, national, or international problem that cannot be solved by the Rosary and our sacrifices." In the end, the message of Fatima is one of hope. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. In times of uncertainty and tribulation, these words resonate as a divine promise that, despite all appearances to the contrary, good will prevail. You have just learned about the extraordinary story of the apparitions of Fatima, an event that continues to echo in our world more than 100 years later. If this video touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to know this urgent message for our times. And you, what else would you like to know about Fatima? Leave your comments below.